Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz here from the Overflow Room with the Haydn Symphony Crusade, and we're up to Symphony number 28. Now, this is one of the most astonishing of all of the early Haydn symphonies. It's really an amazing piece. It has 4 movements, and I think maybe better than any of the other early symphonies we've encountered so far. It illustrates that fantastic point that Haydn made about the fact that he was isolated in his castle in Esterhazy and with no one to disturb him and to bother him and able to work for an appreciative audience, he was forced to become original because originality just oozes from this symphony. And the wonderful thing about it is that its originality, there we go, that's the word, is expressed within the traditional, or what would become the traditional, it wasn't yet, the traditional 4-movement format. Every single movement does something completely astonishing. It's really, really incredible. We're going to have to listen to the whole symphony because the only way to explain it is to hear it. Because these astonishing things are not so much melodic. They're about texture and rhythm and motive. And it's because each movement does something astonishing that the whole piece coheres as the Astonishment Symphony, you might want to call it. It really is amazing music. And there's no point in blathering on about that bit. And I just want to turn to the thing movement by movement, and we'll get to the music, and you'll hear exactly what I'm talking about. We have a splendid Naxos recording here, brought to you by the Nicholas Esterhazy Sinfonia under Bela Drahos. And the first movement is going to be quite surprising for those of you who are fans of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and who think that it was Beethoven who first used da-da-da-dum, that wonderful rhythm, to patch together an entire movement, because boy, Haydn was doing it decades and decades and decades before, back in the 1760s. 40 years earlier, maybe, this movement, first of all, it's in monothematic sonata form, which means that it only has one basic subject. And that subject is our famous 4 notes, not da-da-da-da, not the same melody. It's not in a minor key, but the same rhythm. And it's used every bit as obsessively as it is in Beethoven, maybe even more so. Really, really incredible. And to very, very widely varied expressive ends. In fact, you might even call this movement just an exercise in how to get as much expressive diversity out of that simple rhythm, because it turns up in every possible way. There's also another 3-note motive underneath it. It appears. They appear simultaneously in counterpoint, and you can hear Haydn toy with that one as well. But it's our little 4-note friend that really makes the whole piece. And so without further ado, let's listen to the whole first movement. And just all you need to do in hearing this music is pay attention to that 4-note thing and listen to what Haydn gets out of it. You're going to be amazed. Trust me. It's just incredible what Haydn is able to do with it. And it was that ability to transform and I don't know how to even describe it. You can't believe what he's able to do with this thing. Here it is. Take that, Mr. Beethoven. And I don't mean to say this to make the comparison invidiously. Obviously, each composer is great. Beethoven's expressive intensity in C minor was something absolutely unique in the history of music up to that point. Haydn's intent is really rather different. Haydn's intent is expressive diversity. Beethoven's is expressive, what you might call, what's the word for it? Oh my goodness, I can't even think of it. Focusing on one thing over and over and over again. Intensity, that sort of maniacal, fanatical, whatever. So they're very different. Let's just leave it at that and say they're very different. But they're all using the same four-note motive, and it's really astonishing what Haydn gets out of it in his own way. Now, moving right along, the second movement has its own astonishing textural idea, and that idea is the echo effect. You know what the echo effect is. The echo effect. You know, that. It's an echo. It's when something gets repeated quietly in the distance. And so the second movement consists of a lyrical melody of exceptional stateliness, I would say. It almost sounds like proto-Elgar. It has that sort of nobilmente quality. It's a lovely, serene melody with echoes. The echoes are in a different rhythm. And what happens is that you have the tune, a bit of it, then an echo, then the tune, then an echo, then a tune, then an echo. And then the tune spreads itself out, and the rhythm of the echo, which is always independent of the rest of the tune, gets combined with it. And so the final statement of the tune incorporates the idea of the echo with it. And it's just a lovely, lovely movement that's like nothing else you've ever heard before in your entire life. It's entirely original, full of that Haydn-esque originality. So here I'm playing just, in this case, the exposition. It's a typical two-part sonata form slow movement. And it's really new, something wonderfully new. Here you go. Again, it's amazing. But you see there's something a little bit in common with the fourth movement. It's this idea of repetition of a textural or motivic or rhythmic idea to create expressive variety. That really is what's happening in this entire symphony. And it's being done in every conceivable way, even in the minuet. Now, this minuet may be the most astonishing movement of all in the entire symphony. And it says something about Haydn's originality, that he reserves so much of it for the minuet, which is usually kind of a throwaway dance movement with most other composers. They're kind of moderate and stately and slightly dull, and it's like you go, oh God, here comes the minuet, right? Not with Haydn. With Haydn, you look forward to the minuet because sometimes the most amazing things happen there. And this is one of those cases. First of all, the main theme of the minuet employs a textural technique in the violins of all the strings, actually called bariolage. Now, what is bariolage? Well, bariolage is a unique way of playing the same note to have it have different timbral qualities. The way you do bariolage is you alternate the same note on two strings, two adjacent strings, I guess. And on the violin, let me explain it to you a little bit more clearly. The violin has four strings. Those strings are tuned G, D, A, and E in rising sequence. Now, technically speaking, the G string can play those notes on all the other strings. It can play any note on the instrument just by where you stop the strings. Stopping the strings is what you do when you put your finger on it, on the fingerboard, and you get higher and higher and higher and higher and higher as you move up the fingerboard towards the bridge of the instrument. So technically, on the lowest string, you can play all the notes on all the other strings. And so it goes. I mean, you don't in practice, because there's a difference in thickness and whatnot. But this is theoretical, and it's also possible. So it's very easy to play the next note up, the D, which is only a fifth above the G. On the G string, you just push the spot where you get a D, and you get the same D that you get on the D string. So if you want to play the note D, and you stop the G string so that you have a D on the G string, and then you play the D string, which is an open string, because you haven't done anything to it. It's just the natural vibration of the whole string on the instrument. You get two versions of the note D. And if you alternate back and forth, you get D, 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 like that. And that's what Haydn does in this minuet. And what that does is there's a very different sound between a stopped string, often that has vibrato, and an open string, which has tremendous resonance because your finger isn't getting in the way of it vibrating. It has a very different sound. For that reason, most violin tutors, training violinists, tell them, do not play melodies on open strings, because whatever note you play in the melody that has a string that you haven't done this to, with your fingers, is going to sound quite different and out of place, timbrally speaking. Haydn exploits this to artistic effect by creating a melody which has 6 repeated notes, 3 on each type of string, all the way up and down from the violins and the cellos and the violas. Everybody gets to do it. So the entire melody of this minuet is based on a timbral idea of repeated notes with different sounds. And what a stroke of genius it is. It's a technique that Haydn used actually fairly frequently. There's an entire string quartet whose finale consists of almost nothing but that technique. He really enjoyed the difference in sonority that it created. But the other thing that's so fascinating about it is that it's a musical idea that is the very opposite of a melody, in a sense. It's a sound. It's just a sound. And it's Haydn's ability to work with pure sound to make something expressive and thematic out of just a noise, effectively, that opened up the possibility of doing entirely new things with musical expression. Because, musical expression can be just a tune, which is what most of us think of when we think of musical expression or musical ideas or thematic ideas. But there are other things that are completely unique to the medium of music and its expression on instruments as opposed to voices. And this is what Haydn is playing with. And he was the first one to really do it. And he did it surpassingly well. And this minuet is an extraordinary original example of it. So I'm going to play you first the body of the minuet with no repeats. And then we'll talk about the middle section, the trio, which is every bit as amazing and totally different. So here is the minuet with its bariolage effects in its various melodies. Fascinating, marvelous, intriguing, isn't it? And that opening noise, that wada 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 wada, really, it sounds like no other music that had come before, and doesn't sound like any music that's come since either. It's really, really fantastically original. Now, the central trio is a whole nother world. It actually harks back a little bit to the first movement in the sense that it consists entirely of a tiny little rhythmic motive that's repeated over and over and over and over with different harmonization. But it's in a minor key, and it's in a very mysterious minor key. It's the kind of music that we would later associate with Hungarian music, with Haydn in his folk music vein. And that, again, was an entirely original sound for music generally, to be able to absorb these kinds of exotic harmonies into the normal scheme of symphonic music. And I love this trio. It's just this somewhat eerie waltz. And it has an emotional quality because of its harmonic mysteriousness that's unlike anything else that had come before. I can't think of anything else that sounds even remotely like it or that has the same effect, because it's extremely, you couldn't call it happy, you couldn't call it sad. It's exotic is what it is. It has that feeling of far off places and distant exotic locales, a kind of music coming as if in a dream. It's really an astonishing little tiny thing, 30 seconds long without the repeats. But there had been nothing like it in symphonic music. And what's so amazing is that it has its expressive originality while also employing a technique that is the idea of repetition of a short rhythmic motive that Haydn used in the first movement. And so it's not just expressively original and new, it's also integrated into the symphonic flow of the entire work. And that is the miracle of what Haydn is able to achieve. And he even achieves it in the course of what would normally be just a formally simple minuet movement, something that most composers never thought twice about composing. And so here is the trio section. Isn't that just cool? I don't know. It gets to me. It really gets to me. The odd harmonies. You don't know where it's going, and you've never heard anything quite like it before. It's so intriguing. It tickles your ear. That's what I think you get in these. Now, the finales in most of these early symphonies are usually, and this is no exception, by the way, sort of rollicking, almost sea chanty, happy pieces in compound meter. And that's what this is too. But even here, it fits into the overall energy and aesthetic point of the symphony, because this movement is a perpetual motion movement. And, perpetual motion movements do what they say. The motion is perpetual. It's just a rapidly repeated that never stops from beginning to end. But what makes this one so interesting, first of all, is that the opening has a certain contrapuntal feel to it. It begins almost like a fugue subject with one voice entering after the other in that wonderful rollicking rhythm, which again harks back to the contrapuntal working of the first movement, where you had two thematic cells, a 4-note one and a 3-note one, which were presented in counterpoint. But even besides that, besides the presence of counterpoint, which gives the finale a certain weight and sophistication that so many symphonic finales do their best to avoid, it makes it something that deserves to be in the company of the rest of these movements with their extraordinarily original ideas. But Haydn takes this perpetual motion and tries to make all kinds of different rhythmic patterns out of it by superimposing other instrumental timbres on it. You'll hear that particularly in the recapitulation, where the horns get a melody under which the perpetual motion rhythm keeps going. It's really a lovely little movement. This is a very fine performance of it, by the way, because there's a tendency to play it too quickly. And you can't really appreciate rhythmic detail when it flies by in a blur so quickly that you don't even notice what's happening. This performance, I think, when you hear it, you'll see what I mean. It has its own cumulative power and weight, because you can really take in the exquisite details that Haydn touches in, all with this very, very tiny orchestra. It's just two oboes, two horns, a bassoon on the bottom, and a pointless continuo that all of these early Haydn symphonies seem to acquire in most performances these days. But really, it's just, again, another example of Haydn's inexhaustible inventiveness and originality. And let's go. Here's the finale. And that, my friends, is one of the most amazing early Haydn symphonies. I hope that this little chat, and I haven't talked a lot because I think the music itself is so eloquent. It just expresses, it does what it does, and it hits you right away. And it requires no special pleading. It immediately makes its effect, and that effect is, as I said, one of completely astonishing originality. I love this symphony. I just love it. Isn't it amazing that nobody plays it, like, ever, outside of complete Haydn symphony cycles? Wouldn't it be wonderful if you went to a concert and they just started off with this fabulous symphony? Everybody would just go, ooh, wow, listen to that. Isn't that marvelous? And we hear so much of what the classical language, the language of music itself, is going to become in the hands of a genius like Haydn. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you for joining me. Take care.